Hello everybody. How's it going? I'm James Chen, and this is First Attack. And it's been a long time since I've done a standard First Attack episode. I know before EVO there's a lot of stuff going on, and after EVO I was just tired, so it was hard to get myself back in the groove. But here I am again, back with a lot of the lessons and trying to help everybody out there get better at Street Fighter. If you guys are tuning in for the first time, just letting you know that what First Attack tries to focus on is very, beginner level not strategies, but just tips on how to get better at fighting games. My goal is to help you learn how to play fighting games as much as possible. And a lot of the times the content that I do on the show is fueled largely by the people who are watching the show and trying to learn how to play fighting games. So I always ask for user feedback for a lot of that kind of such. So two of the things that I tend to do a lot here on the show is ask jchensor stuff. If you have any questions about fighting games, on certain areas that seem really weird to you conceptually, send an email to UltraChenTV@gmail.com with the subject line Ask jchensor. Also, I try to help people with dexterity and execution issues, so you can also email to that same address, UltraChenTV@gmail.com, with some execution stuff that you have problems with the subject line of Execution Corner. I just got one for Guilty Gear, so that's actually pretty exciting. I'm going to love trying to do a lot of these Guilty Gear combos, because some of these Guilty Gear combos are ridiculous, so it'll be fun. It'll be fun stuff to learn, so it's going to be very, very cool. So, okay. Today, what are we talking about today here on First Attack? So, a lot of times when we try to teach fighting games, one of the things that we try to teach is how you should play, how you should react to your opponent, how you should learn, how you should strategize and stuff like that. But one of the hardest things about fighting games is that most of the time when you play fighting games, there's very little about a fighting game that is one player. Obviously, you're playing against somebody else. It's a two-player game, right? But this is actually kind of one of the hardest things to grasp in a fighting game. More than any other competitive game, there is almost nothing the only time where a fighting game really kind of becomes a one-player game is when you start connecting combos. And that's at the point where you can kind of stop worrying about stuff. But even then, there are a lot of things to think about, and you always need to be reacting to your opponent. I said earlier on that fighting games are a lot like dancing. How your opponent moves, how your opponent, what your opponent does and stuff largely dictates what you're doing, how you play, what you do with your character, how you control your character. You can almost consider combos those weird, awkward periods of dancing, like at weddings where they form that circle and one person jumps in the middle and does their crazy thing and stuff like that. That's what basically combos are, right? But outside of that, the game is so organically, it's such an organic game that you're interacting with your opponent constantly in ways that you probably aren't even aware of. And so what I'm going to do this episode is talk about something that I'm not sure a lot of people have talked about before, and that is, reading your opponent, figuring out what they're going to do. How do you read your opponent? How do you figure out? In other words, when you play against an opponent, what is your strategy on trying to develop your battle plan against them and try to figure out how to defeat them? It's more complicated than just understanding what your tricks are, the character matchup. There's so much more involved to it. And so that's what this episode is going to focus on. It's not going to focus on any specifics of characters, like, okay, so generally this matchup you do. No, this is a completely psychological mind game reading kind of episode. So here we go. So let's go over to the super fancy slideshow presentation. So, okay, so here we go. Your opponent. What is the whole thing about your opponent? And there's so much that you give away during fighting games that you're completely unaware of. One of the favorite things that I know commentators love to do is while they're commentating a match, they like to predict. They like to throw out their own suggestions, like, "Oh, wake up Ultra," and then your opponent will. Then the guy like throws an immediate attack, and you're like, "Oh, my wake up Ultra would have worked," and stuff like that, right? That kind of stuff happens a lot, but here's the part that's gonna blow your mind, right? As commentators, we love to do that because it's fun. Because it's fun to look right. I do it all the time. I'm always like, "Oh, I would wake up here and do this." Oh, he's gonna uppercut. But the funny thing about it is, if somehow, like let's say Vi was playing against someone, does a meaty low strong, and the opponent doesn't wake up in an Ultra, and I'm like, "You should wake up Ultra," and then I was like, "Oh, I would have hit Vi." If I was playing Alex Vi, and that exact same situation came up, with the exact amount of time on the clock, with the exact same amount of energy, and I was put into that position in the exact same way, Vi probably would have did something different. In fact, he probably would have blocked my Wake Up Ultra. And the interesting thing is, the question is, how would he have done that? Like in that situation, he went for the media attack, but he's playing me, and I'm going to Wake Up Ultra. So now he's not going to media attack? I mean, at this point in time, what you're almost doing is, I'm almost saying like top players like Vi and Justin, those guys are psychic. And a lot of the times when you play them, it feels that way. And it's really just about reading your opponent and understanding how they play and what their tendencies are. And it's not even really necessarily, playing this guy a lot so that you've gotten a bead on their habits and patterns. It's really developing these reads and understanding the situation right at that particular moment. So that's the hardest part. So let's talk about this a little bit, right? I mean, there's two kinds of situations that you can be put in. And one of the first ways, obviously, is, hang on, let me move this forward a little bit. Long sessions, right? If you play a long set, if you play a 1 to 50 set with your opponent, or if you have your best friend and you guys are playing each other forever, eventually you guys are going to learn each other's habits. You're going to know what they want to do. And so, you end up that online Tony and, why can't I remember? Hugo 101. Online Tony and Hugo 101 situation where they know everything about each other. And so they're so familiar with each other. And this happens a lot of times when two people play each other. They get to know each other and all this stuff like that, right? This is not what we're really concerned about, to be honest with you. What we're concerned about today is really about the short sessions when you play against somebody like for the first time in a tournament, and you need to figure out right away what the heck it is that they're doing, and you need to figure out fast because you've only got 2 out of 3. Or you're playing online. And when you play online, you're going to run into this opponent. It's the first time you've ever seen this guy. You want to beat this guy because you don't want to lose, right? So how do you evaluate the person super fast? Okay. So as I go through this, I'm going to talk about different ways and different techniques in which you can learn to read your opponent. So I'm just going to summarize them here really quick. The first most important thing, like I just talked about, is the early skill level assessment. You want to figure out how good your opponent is. And in fact, I'm going to focus on this section the most. This is going to be the most fleshed out portion of this episode. And I do apologize. This episode is basically just going to be almost 100% slide based. So get used to reading this text and staring at my face. Because like I said, I don't want to do any like concrete examples. This is all conceptual here. So. But, one of the first things that you want to do when you play against someone in a quick evaluation, in a short session, is to figure out how good they are right away. Once you get to that point, then you start wanting to recognize patterns and what I call moments. I did not coin that term. That was a Ryan Hunter term. I really like that term. I've even heard it from like super old school players talking about fighting games as well. But it's just a really good definition of specific situations that can occur over and over again, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So, The next thing I want to talk about is training your opponent. Once you start recognize their patterns and recognitions, once you figure out how good they are, there's this concept of training your opponent. And what training opponent basically means is you start getting them to do what you want them to do. In fact, they think they're playing a game. They think they're, choosing their own actions, but actually you're controlling them in a weird way. And a lot of players, once they get to that level where they can train their opponent, there's those weird rounds where you can just tell that they're doing everything that you want them to do, and it's a fantastic feeling. So, and then of course there's a huge difference between offline and online playing. Big difference, and mostly it's not even really a difference. It's just that when you play online, there's one whole part that's missing that you have when you're offline. So a lot of times when online players, like what me and David have talked about a long time ago, the Street Fighter Cross Tekken scene, the online players are very strong, but as soon as they go to an actual tournament, they have trouble because there's a lot of things they're not used to. There's a lot of subtle things that offline playing causes that you have to get used to. So I'm going to go into that in just a little bit. So hang on. Okay. So let's just talk about long sessions. I'm not even going to talk about short sessions at all. I'm just going to be going over how to... Oops, actually, I did that backwards, didn't I? I have typed this completely wrong. I actually wanted to talk about short sessions. And so all these titles are going to say long sessions. In fact, let me go fix that right now. Sorry, guys. Let me kill this here. You're going to stare at me for a little bit while I type. This is going to be awesome. Hi guys, how you doing? Oh wait, no, that's right. I am okay. I did type up a slide for long sessions. My bad. Okay. What's that? No, it's okay. It's okay. I've got the right one here, so this is the right one. Okay, so I think after I typed these all up, my mind told myself, you know what, I don't want to talk about long sessions. I was just going to skip over it, but I left the slide in here, so let's go back to that really quick. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, long sessions here. Okay, so long sessions, as I said, you can take your time a lot more because you're going to be playing with somebody for a very long time, right? So you guys are going to play each other. You're going to get to learn things. Not only that, but because you know you're going to be playing a long session, so when you play with your friend and you're just playing these long sessions, or you're playing someone that you've played a lot of times, you are able to experiment more. You're able to test things. You're able to try tricks, stuff that's not necessarily optimal. You can talk to your opponent who just happens to be sitting there. You can ask him questions. You can do all sorts of things like, wait, why did you throw a fireball there? And all sorts of things like that. And then there are some rounds where you're just like purposely going to not try practical things. Very early on, when UMVC3 came out, one of my first teams involved Ghost Rider. And I was playing Edma, and he was using Iron Fist. Well, Iron Fist obviously needs to get in. Ghost Rider needs to keep you out. We were playing a long session, and basically when the round started, what he would do is hold away on the controller. He actually walked Iron Fist away from Ghost Rider at the get ready, fight portion so that we were a screen away when it started because he purposely wanted to get in. He wanted to learn to try to get his way in there. So he was doing bad things on purpose to learn, and you can afford to do these kind of things in long sessions because it's just casual. You're able to play and just kind of have fun and stuff like that. So, and the problem is, like, if you're playing a long set, like let's say it's actually a money match or something, like a first to 10 or a first to 50 or some crazy thing like that, like Justin and Filipino Champ just did recently. They played a set of 70 games, I think it was, or something like that, and the problem with that in long sessions is when you're actually practicing, it's cool, you can do whatever, but if you're trying to win something like a money match, you do need a wider range of skills. You need a wider range of tools. If you have only just the basic stuff that you've learned from playing short sessions, you're not going to do well in these situations at all, because if your opponent can read you and learn you and you do not have that skill, So you have all your skills for your short-term sessions, and they have that ability to figure you out and get to know you. You may win, like go even, maybe the first 5 games or so, but then eventually you're just going to get dominated. So, Philip, the answer to that question is they did a 70-game set, and it ended 35-35. And then they basically played it first to 50, and Justin won that 50-46. So, I don't know if they have that uploaded somewhere, but it was crazy. It was in Marvel. This was Marvel that they were playing each other in. So, was it Street Fighter 4? I don't know actually. I would have assumed it was Marvel. So, in any case, let's go on to short sessions here. Let's talk. Actually, let's take a break first. We'll take a break, and when we come back, I'll start talking about basically what most people want to learn, and that's how to read your opponent in a very short period of time. So we will be right back as soon as I do all this stuff. Okay. Alright everybody, welcome back to First Attack. This week I am talking about learning how to read your opponents and how that exactly works, because you always hear people talk about that. Oh, I read that he did this, I've learned how to read my opponents, blah blah blah, but it's such a vague concept. Like, how do you actually read your opponent? How do you actually figure out the strategies with them? Well, to be honest with you, I talked about how a lot of it is psychological and stuff like that, but you do need a very base understanding of your character and your general strategy. So once you get to this level, you've reached a point where you're thinking definitely much higher level Street Fighter, because now you're trying to approach how to fight your opponent. And I'm going to go into that a little bit, because I'm going to talk about a lot of different levels of players and such, and I'm going to describe them. So in short sessions, you need to get a read quickly. If you're playing a 2 out of 3 in a tournament, you sit down, you're going to a tournament like Actualized here in the stream was talking about. He says that he's just going to a tournament, and a lot of top players are going to be there. So, you sit down at a tournament, you're sitting down next to a person that you've never played before, and you're wondering to yourself, wow, what am I going to do to fight this guy? Well, thing is, if you're a Ryu player, you need a good base game plan for Ryu. You got to know what your general strategy is. If you're a Zangief player, you got to know what your general strategy is. If you're Guile, you know what your general strategy is. So what you actually do, I'm not putting you on blast, actually. I'm actually encouraging you. I think that you're going to do great over there. I hope you have a great time. But in general, when you start a game, what you want to do here is have your base knowledge of the character. You need to have like a core understanding of what your game plan is and game mechanic. And that's the tricky thing about playing Street Fighter. You have this little core situation here, and then from there you kind of like start straying from it depending on how your opponent reacts. So you start with here, like almost think of it like one of those lava lamp bubbles sitting there floating in the liquid. And then as you start to figure out your opponent, it starts to like drift in a certain direction, and you can see it like kind of string over to this side a little bit, and it starts to lean this way, and then all of a sudden it starts to branch off a little this way and such. So that's kind of how you want to approach a match. You have your core gameplay, but as you start making the reads, as you start understanding your opponent, it starts morphing and going towards more of a different direction. Like there's some players who are just crazy. They just love to go crazy, right? I played at the run back last week, and I ran into a Soul player who was always just constantly moving. And I was trying to play my core Johnny game. He was running around everywhere, and I couldn't get him to stand still, so I couldn't play my Johnny combo. I couldn't play my Johnny game, and I did not adjust. I did not adjust to that style, and I ended up losing. I won the first game, but then he won the next two because he made an adjustment. I did not. So that was my fault. Very hard to learn to adjust during a match, but it's something that you've got to figure out. It's all the stuff that you need to assess. So, I see we have Mike Ross joining us here. Thanks for Mike for jumping in here. So let's keep going. I talked about having a core gameplay, right? So what you start to do is you start playing your core gameplay. For example, with Ryu, you can throw fireballs, you can fake fireballs. With Guile, for example, you throw sonic booms, jump roundhouse them, stand forward them, try to do all these different little anti-airs. Zangief has situations where he walks in and tries to get in SPDs. You play your basic game, and then the first thing you really have to do is just play your game and see how they react. Really start paying attention to what it is that they're doing. Because what you're trying to do right away is figure out how good your opponent is. When you sit down next to a person that you've never seen before, you have no idea if they're going to be an amazing player that really understands Street Fighter, or you don't know if they're going to be a flowchart Ken. Right? So let's just say you start the round one fight, Ryu, throw a fireball, you fake a fireball, your opponent just jumps at you and you uppercut him out of the air. You walk up to him when he gets up and he just DPs right when he gets up. So now, okay, you've already immediately figured out, okay, he jumped at me. When I faked my fireball, I uppercut him, he woke up DP. You want to try this again. So you just start like faking fireballs or whatever like that, and if you just notice that he just jumps like crazy, then your whole game plan is done. Then basically what you're going to do is just stand there, let him jump at you, uppercut him, walk away from him when he gets up because he's going to do a wake-up uppercut, let him jump at you again and uppercut, and keep this process going. However, if the second time you go back and fake a fireball, you see him not jump and he starts walking back and forth and starts playing this footsie game on you, then you can automatically say, you know what, okay, he knows what he's doing, he understands what he's doing. You see what I'm saying? So already just within like the first 5-10 seconds of a match, you've already kind of started to assess your opponent's level. And so that's really, that's a key skill. So once you start figuring that out, as the round keeps going, you're trying to figure out how good they are. Because we talk about this a lot too. You'll see Vi and Justin Wong lose some Street Fighter 4 matches in early rounds, or even they'll not look like they're playing particularly strong and they look completely beatable. That's because Vi just wants to see how you're going to react to a barrage of fireballs. It might not necessarily be the best thing to do to keep throwing fireballs at him, but if the opponent jumps over one of them and predicts it and times it or whatever, or if you can fake him into jumping, he's going to get a better read that will help him win the second game a lot better. So once you start figuring it out and you try to basically place your opponent into a skill level, and I've very much simplified this into 4 basic levels. Okay, I'm going to talk about beginner level. Beginner level is basically the player knows how to play Street Fighter, okay? He can throw fireballs, he can uppercut, he has his basic combos down and whatnot. The thing, I'll get into the details of each level as we go. Then there's the intermediate level, which is a player who starts to understand that there are tricks and gimmicks, and there are these concept of trying to play smart and such. There's the advanced level where they really start understanding what mind games are. And then there's the experts who are pretty much there at that point where they can start training their opponents to do what they want to do. There are 2 levels that I am not going to talk about today, so I'm actually leaving 2 of them out. And there's learning. So there's the guys who just can't throw fireballs, they can't do uppercuts. They hold down on the controller and mash roundhouse and just keep sweeping and sweeping and sweeping. I mean, we don't even need to talk about that level right now, because that level is, if you run into an opponent like that, you're just going to jump kick him, sweep him until he dies, right? So there's really not much to talk about in that situation. And then there are pros. Pros, I'm talking about guys like Justin Wong, like Pierrog, not even necessarily at that level. I mean, I'm talking maybe not even super top players. Most of the people that you see at Big 2 weeklies, the at next level, the Battle Coliseums, most of the people you see at Wednesday night fights and runbacks, they're in that. Heck, even Mike Ross would probably qualify into this level, because that's kind of what I'm referring to about, pros and such like that. So, basically, pros are the people who are at this point really good, and they are a threat to make it high into a level of tournament. So, okay. So, let's talk about the beginner. Okay. The beginner, like I said, he knows how to play fighting games, right? But the problem with it is he's still playing a one-player game. This is really kind of the way to define a beginner from everybody else. They know how to throw fireballs. They understand the concept that you uppercut people. They've probably played the computer a lot. So the way that they're playing is they know what to do, but they're just reacting to everything. You know, I'm going to throw a fireball, the computer jumped, I uppercut. I'm going to walk around, the computer whiffed an uppercut, I'm going to punish them. And then when you go and play in an actual game, when you play against someone else, you're just trying your strategies. You're not thinking about what the opponent is trying to do. You're just thinking to yourself, I know with Ken, my uppercut is really good. So you run up to the opponent and try to uppercut him, right? You know, when you play against the computer and let's say you pick DJ, he's your favorite character, you're going to walk up and slide a lot because it moves forward and knocks people down. So it's like, oh, I'm just going to do this, hit this button a lot. And then sometimes the computer will get hit by it, sometimes they don't. You just know that that's something you want to try to do. So basically, that's what a beginner plays like. These guys are going to be susceptible to repeated tactics. So in other words, I talked about this before. Since they're not playing against you, you know, I always tell the story of there was one time on Vanilla when I was playing online against a Ryu player, and I knocked him down and I baited out a wake-up uppercut. And I punished him with like low forward drill or something like that. Then I walked up to him again and I backdashed again. He did wake up uppercut and I did low forward drill. Then I walked up to him again and I backdashed and he did wake up uppercut and I punished him. And I walked up to him again and I backdashed and he uppercutted a fourth time. You know, it's just, there's definitely this, and I got that read very early on that he was a beginner player, so that he was just habituated into doing something in a specific situation with no rhyme or reason. He just knew wake-up uppercuts were effective, so that he was going to try it. I made that read, and I was able to punish him for it. You know, in a lot of situations, you'll think to yourself, oh, you know what, he's going to learn, and so I better change up my tactic. But in that particular situation, I kind of just had this feeling that he was going to do that multiple times, and he did. So, essentially, at the very beginning of the round, I made an assessment and got that kind of figured out. And, sorry, Sog. No. Then there's the intermediate players. What the intermediate players have gotten to is that they start understanding that there is this concept of tricks, and there's such a thing as good tactics and such like that. These are the guys that will read stuff that say, you know, do this, and then do this, and then your opponent typically jumps at you in this situation, right? My favorite one is always in Third Strike with the universal overheads. I remember watching this one player who would always go up to the opponent, do universal overhead, sweep. He knew it was a thing to do. I don't think he really understood why, but it would work a lot of times against people that, because the people he was playing against weren't particularly strong. The people he was playing against would get hit by two overheads and they'd stand up and then he'd sweep them. He just knew that that was a trick. He just knew that that was a pattern, a sequence. You know, this is the level where you rely on things known as block strings. Like, oh, this is a good block string, you know. And really, you don't want to start going into these patterns. That's the biggest problem with this, is that you go into these patterns and you become very predictable, in other words. So you don't want to do that. The thing about this is, because you start getting to the point where you understand the game, that there is this concept of tactics and learning and stuff like that, you also start to learn to adjust. You learn to change your gameplay, like, you know, I'm going to throw 2 fireballs and then I'm going to stop, right? The problem is you become very easy to read. Intermediate players are probably some of the easiest players to read, because they definitely fall under these little patterns like that. In fact, I joked about throwing 2 fireballs. There's this whole concept of the rule of 2 that I always like to talk about, because a lot of players always think that, like, throw 2 fireballs, then fake a fireball, and see if you can get them to jump. Do 2 universal overheads, then do the sweep. You know, they got up, throw them. They get up, throw them. Third time, don't throw them. Change it up. This is the rule of two that a lot of people fall into. And while obviously there's a reason why it works, because the first time you did it, they might not have noticed. The second time, you've gotten their attention, so change it on the third time. That's just very standard psychology. And so it's a pattern, it's a sequence, and it's not going to get you far once you start playing against stronger players. So then we get to advanced players. Now, these are the players that are starting to get to the point where they can play in tournaments and they can do well. Once you go from intermediate to advanced, this is the time where when you play against someone like an Alex Vi in a tournament, when you're intermediate, Vi just destroys you. Like, you don't even know what the heck just happened necessarily. And then once you become advanced, you start understanding a little bit more why he's beating you. You start understanding that, that he is reading you. You're getting this feeling like, oh, why did I fall for that? Oh my God, of course I'm going to do that. That's when you start to get to this point. And then also, it's also where you start to feel a little bit more comfortable going up against stronger players, right? So if you play against a decently strong player and such like that, you feel like you actually had that chance. You actually start feeling like you are doing good against them. So, like I said, they start understanding what's right and what's wrong. So let's say you throw a fireball, or let's say, for example, the opponent makes you block, like you're Ryu, and the opponent makes you block a stand roundhouse with Cammy, and then you throw a fireball, and then he ultras right through it. As an advanced player, you're going to think to yourself, of course, if I do stand roundhouse, if I block her stand roundhouse, of course I'm going to react with a fireball. I was totally obvious. I was red. And so you start to understand that kind of stuff. So you start picking up on things like that, and you start noticing those kind of things. And then you get to the expert level, right? The expert level, this is where you start getting to the point where you can read your opponent and you can start detecting their patterns and you can start detecting their habits. This is the level you reach when you're truly playing that two-player game. Advanced, you know what the right things to do and you know what the wrong things are. You know that you let yourself open and stuff like that. You know that in general your opponents will get scared in this situation. You know in general that human beings tend to react a certain way. But expert is when you start adjusting based on things that you notice, on the ability to read opponents. So this is like this is like the key moment right here, and this is where you really start being able to play your opponents like puppets, that you can train them very, very easily. And it's really an awesome feeling. I'm not gonna lie. Once it gets to that point, there are times that I've played against people, and you just know what they're doing, like every single second. And it's just for some reason you can feel it, like you can't even explain it, but you've got them locked down in the corner, and you're like poking them with stuff, and then you know they're gonna stop blocking, right? They're going to start blocking at this moment. You run up and throw them, and they get up, and you can fake them, and you throw them, and you get up, and you fake something, and then do meaty uppercut and hit them, and then into FADC Ultra, and those moments happen, and it's really, really cool. So let's talk about these levels a little bit more. It's really interesting because the advanced level has some serious handicaps in there, and that is... once you get to an advanced level, there's kind of weird. There's kind of like this weird curve you're going on. Like you feel like you're just getting better and better and better and better. But there is a problem with reaching advanced levels, is that you start understanding psychology so much that you tend to fall into psychological patterns, right? You start realizing things at that moment that everybody would realize something. And what this actually ends up happening is it making it so that expert players sometimes can beat advanced players easier than they can beat intermediate players. Because intermediate players will still do the illogical thing from time to time. But if you play at the advanced level, if you play extremely logical, you are going to get dominated on by an expert player, because they will know everything that you're going to do. They'll know every moment that you discover stuff. They'll figure out every second that you change your mind about something. And so as an advanced player, one of the things that's going to get you from advanced to expert is learning how to go against your own intuition, learning how to go against your own human nature. That's really, really hard to do. That's one of the hardest things, I think, to learn, is to break against your general patterns and such like that. Vi actually said something that that always sticks in my mind. There was a piece of advice he gave. I don't know what the context was. I don't even remember if he was the one who originated it. It might have been someone else. But I've heard Vi say the advice that he has is do 2 logical things and then throw in something crazy. And then go back to doing a couple logical things and then doing something crazy. And it's beautiful advice. It's fantastic advice, because as long as you keep playing logical, and this is what advanced players do, they just keep playing the way that you're supposed to play. And when you fight against an expert, they will destroy. Well, experts will beat you up for it, but a pro will demolish you. The pro level will demolish you for doing the right thing all the time. So you really have to go against your gut a lot of the times to really get past advanced and get into expert level. Advanced players, like I said, and ironically, when you're playing against the top players, you actually feel like you had a better chance against them than you did when you were an intermediate. Because when you're an intermediate, you're losing to them. You have no idea why you were losing to them. But at this point in time, you're actually starting to figure out what you're doing wrong, kind of. You know, you're like, oh, yeah, he predicted my fireball in this situation. But the problem is it doesn't process into your head properly. You understand why you got hit, but you're not doing anything to fix it. But as a result, it still feels like you could fight him. Like you play against an Alex Vi, you'd be like, oh, you know, I came close and stuff like that, you know. And that's because probably the first game he was, you know, trying to learn your patterns and learn your play style and stuff like that. But that's the thing, is that you have a play style to learn. And because of that, it does feel like you have a chance. But the other problem with getting to an advanced player is you actually start really having trouble with beginners. And this is a quote from Mike Ross. I don't know if he's still in here right now. Mike Ross and Gutek said this to Rennick. And Rennick quoted on one of his channels. And he basically said that, you know, Mike and Gutex told him that he forgot how to fight scrubs. You know, he had gotten to this level, but now he can't fight scrubs anymore. And this is a serious problem because, like I said, you get into this mindset where you're so logical about everything. You know what people are supposed to do. And then you fight against a beginner who's not doing anything he's supposed to do. He's just waking up uppercut 3 times in a row. He just keeps jumping it. You uppercut him twice out of the air. And you're like, he's not going to jump at me anymore. You throw a fireball and he jumps over and he beats you up. You're like, why would you do that? Why? That doesn't make any sense. Why would you jump a 3rd time? So advanced players, this is probably the point where most players get into and get stuck in a rut. Because you start losing to people better and worse than you. And it's really, really frustrating. This is probably the hardest place to be as a fighting game player. Probably the hardest wall to break through. But if you can break through it, it's also the most rewarding, because as soon as you break through from advanced to expert, there's just something about that transition that just feels so good. So, and of course, you know, the transition from being a beginner to an intermediate player, it's really obvious. Like if you have a bunch of friends, you guys don't know what you're doing and mashing buttons, the first person to transfer over to intermediate is the guy who rules that arcade or rules that home. He just beats everybody and no one can touch him anymore. Then he goes to a tournament and gets blown up and everyone's like, what? I thought my friend was so good. You know, that's that kind of situation right there. So, okay, so I'm going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about pattern recognition. So I talked about the different levels and stuff like that. And so now that we understand these 4 different levels of play, and again, we're not talking about professionals like the best of the best, the Vi's, the Justin Wongs, the Ricky Ortizes, and those guys. Once you get to that point, okay, then what do you do when you play against your opponent? How do you start reading them? So the first step of that is pattern recognition, and we will get into that in just a bit. Alright everybody, welcome back to First Attack. I'm going over how to read your opponents and such. And I just talked about the 4 different levels of players. We talked about beginners, intermediate, experts, and pros. And so from there, once you start being able to quantify your opponent in the first few, in the first round or whatever like that, let's say you start being able to put them. I mean, the reason why I bring up these different roles is because you got to keep these roles in mind, because that way when you play against an opponent and you start playing him, like remember I talked about that little bubble that you got to start branching off into different directions based on how your opponent plays. A lot of that really comes down to on where you classify them on their skill level. I talked about, how the beginners will do the same thing over and over and over again, right? So if I've classified them as a beginner, I'll expect to wake up uppercut 4 times in a row. I'll expect them to jump at me all the time. And I can just sit there. I can just stand there and they'll eventually jump at me. In fact, they were talking about that on the chat. One guy was saying that he almost gets bored playing against beginners because he knows if he just stands there, the opponent's going to jump at you. And you're just going to uppercut him eventually. But if you make the assessment that they are an intermediate player, then if you catch them with a fake uppercut, like a fake fireball, they jump, you uppercut, and then you do a fake fireball, they jump, and then you uppercut them, you know that rule of 2 kind of probably applies to them a little bit. Then at this next point, they're probably scared to jump at you. Now all of a sudden you can run at them a lot better and such, or you can throw fireballs with more impunity. You can just start chucking them all day. And he's not going to jump over it because you scared him those first 2 times. So basically what you're trying to do to get past that intermediate to the advanced level is you want to start really recognizing patterns. And then you'll be trying to do this throughout your advanced period before you get into the expert area, and that's when you really start being able to do really good pattern recognition. So the important thing to really understand is that everybody has patterns. Everybody has patterns. Like, it doesn't matter how good of a player you have patterns and you have tendencies. I mean, one of the reads that I'm sure David's going to go over actually in the next show, Infiltration likes to crouch tech a lot. Infiltration's a world-class player, but he has patterns, he has tendencies, and PR Rog managed to blow that up with focus attacks, right? And so that's something to understand, is that everybody has a pattern, everyone can be read. The best players are going to mask it better than anybody else. The best players are going to be the ones that they're so hard to read because they have... See, the thing about it is most players in any given situation, in any given moment, and I'll talk about moments in just a little bit, good players, intermediate players, advanced players probably have like 2 or 3 options in that particular moment. Pro players have maybe like 7 things that they'll do. They may have like 8 different things that they'll do. So every time they run into that situation, they have more options. It makes it harder for you to read them, and then it's easier for them to throw you off your game. So again, moments. How do you start recognizing patterns? Is the first thing before you can start learning how to recognize patterns is you have to understand what a moment is. You have to classify what a moment is. And a good example for this is, I think Ryan Hunter used almost this exact example. Let's say your opponent jumps at you and you jumped at him at the exact same time. You meet up in the air. Is this a moment? Maybe, not necessarily. The moment, the key moment that you want to know, the key moment that you want to think about is, let's say you kick first and you hit him out of the air. You land, the opponent is falling down and he's going to land on their feet, and you're standing right where they're about to land. This is a moment. This is a key moment that you want to classify right here. Because at this particular moment, as soon as the opponent lands, something is going to happen. And in that particular moment, the opponent can do the same thing over and over and over again. He can uppercut when he lands. He can backdash when he lands. He can do, like if he's Viper, a Seismo feint, a Thunder Knuckle, an EX burn kick. There are so many different options to do in this kind of situation. Even just landing and blocking, landing and jumping again, right? I mean, for example, I've seen situations where someone will jump kick Ricky Ortiz out of the air, and the guy lands. And for you as the offensive player, that's a moment, but it's also a moment for Ricky too, right? Ricky's gotten his opponent understanding that he may land and do EX Messiah. So you'll actually see him land from that getting hit out of the air, and land with an immediate jump dive kick. You know, it's like the most illogical step because that's going to lose to practically everything. But he recognized that as a moment, and by recognizing that as a moment, he was able to classify patterns based off of that moment. That situation probably happened 2 or 3 times earlier in the tournament or earlier in the match. So now he has something to quantify, a specific point to start recognizing patterns. You know, for example, if you fake a fireball and the opponent jumps at you and you uppercut him, that's not necessarily a moment. The moment would be more like you've thrown a fireball, they've blocked it, and now you fake a fireball, they jump. That's a moment. When they're in block stun and you walk up to them, this is the moment. They're getting out of block stun and you're about to do something, right? Because there's another situation where you could fake a fireball and get them to jump. Let's say you jump backwards. You jump backwards, you land, you fake a fireball, they jump at you, and then you uppercut them. Jumping backwards and landing is the moment. That's the key place that you got to be careful of. Now, interestingly enough, coming out, getting them to block a fireball, then faking a fireball is a completely different moment than jumping backwards and landing and faking a fireball and getting them to jump and uppercut them. Same trick, same fake fireball, but they're completely 2 different moments. And that's kind of an interesting thing. So sometimes your fake fireball will work in a particular moment. Like every time you jump backwards, you fake it, they jump at you. But in that other situation where you got them to block a fireball, you do a fake fireball, they're not going to jump. So it's not necessarily that the opponent is weak to fake fireballs. It's more that they're weak to you jumping backwards and having this habit to think that you're going to land and throw a fireball every single time. So you have to understand the moment is not actually the action that occurs. The moment is everything that happens right before that action. And once you start realizing how to pick out all these moments and all these situations, in fact, maybe next week or one of these weeks, I should just watch a match video and just pause at every single point that there is a moment. Ryan Hunter did do that. He had a video where he analyzed Latif versus Justin Wong a long time ago. Seriously, one of the best tutorials I've ever seen. And if you guys can find that on YouTube, or just tweet Ryan Hunter at OS Ryan Hunter and ask for that episode. It's a really good one because he talks about that. He talks about moments, one of them being in which after Latif blocks Rufus's low roundhouse. And that situation, Latif did a strong thunder knuckle like almost every time, and it wasn't until the very end of the round, end of the fight, that Justin finally took advantage of it one time. But again, blocking that low roundhouse, and when that low roundhouse finished was a moment to notice and such. And so it's really, really important to start paying attention to those. If you don't recognize moments, if you cannot pluck them out of a fight when you're playing against your opponent, it is going to be almost impossible to start recognizing patterns and start reading your opponent, because those are the particular situations in which you want to do that kind of stuff. The interesting thing about it is, I talked about how beginner players, they'll jump at you 7 times in a row and you'll uppercut them, but then intermediate players will jump at you twice and you uppercut them and then they'll stop jumping at you, right? Because they're like, oh, I got uppercutted twice out of the air. The trick about that, again, that's that rule of 2 that I said is a problem for intermediate players. You don't want to get stuck on this rigid concept of the rule of 2, the 2 universal overheads into sweep with in third strike, for example. You don't want to get into these moments because generally, people will learn after 2 times. Because like I said, the first time catches them off guard and they don't notice anything. The second time you hit them with it, because you hit them with it again, they're like, oh, I got hit by this again, so they're going to make the adjustment. That's why the rule of 2 works. But really, one of the things that's going to get you past intermediate and into advanced is realizing when your opponent has learned. For example, let's say you fake a fireball and the opponent jumps at you and you uppercut him out of the air, right? There are some times where you two are just in this really big scuffle. You're poking at each other. You're like doing all these crazy things. You're hitting buttons. And then at that moment you fake a fireball, the opponent jumps at you and you uppercut him. there's a good chance your opponent had no idea what just happened there, that they had no idea that you faked a fireball and that's what got them to jump. Because it was just in the middle of the fray, it was just hectic, nobody really kind of knows what happened. And smart players will recognize that. Smart players, once they've played this game enough, realize that the situation was so hectic enough that my opponent didn't learn anything. So you know what? Fake fireball's still going to work. They're still going to jump at me, and I'm going to still uppercut them. However, against that same opponent, if they're walking back and forth and no one's doing anything, and then you do fireball short and the guy jumps, and then you uppercut him out of the air, it's such a blatantly obvious thing that happened that you know your opponent learned. You know your opponent is going to make an adjustment and look for that. So sometimes you can fake a fireball and the guy will jump and uppercut him, and you know you can do it again. And against that same opponent, there are situations where you'll do a trick, counter them, and you just know they saw what you did. You can totally read that moment that they recognize what happened, and you don't have to do it twice. You can automatically change over to the next level of mind games and hit them with the next one. There are certain times where you'll fake a fireball, they'll jump, and then a scuffle, fake a fireball, and then jump. And you can tell even after 2 times they haven't learned, and you can still do it a 3rd time. It's really, really hard to explain how that works, but sometimes it's just this weird way that you can detect it. And so, sorry guys, I'm taking a look here. Actualize is asking me a question here. You're very popular today. He says, you run into a really good player that it feels like they're playing accelerated speed compared to you. Like they'll do specific movements and play placements that are always favor them. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And that's actually kind of something I'm going to get into in just a little bit. There's a reason why that happens. There's a reason why it happens when you play against a stronger player. It feels like they're faster than you. It feels like their character's recovery is better than you and stuff like that, right? But yeah, again, this bullet point is just kind of the same, saying the same kind of thing. Circumstance of how a moment occurred can affect your opponent's learning. I don't know. There was one time I was playing against, I think it was my brother, and I did a trick to him, and I did the same trick to him again, and I could just tell he didn't figure out what it was. And then I did the trick to him again, and the 3rd time I knew he noticed it. I knew he figured it out. And so the 4th time, I faked the trick and was able to already advanced punish him for him figuring out the counter to my trick. I already had my counter ready for his counter. I was able to beat him with that beforehand. So like I said, I wish there was a textbook thing like, you can tell your opponent learns when, but it's impossible. It's just one of those things that you play enough, you start figuring out, you start feeling it, and you kind of just feel that moment in which you can tell your opponent actually did that. Yeah, Dead Frog, that's actually a great thing. The Bison Head Stomp story, that happened to me. That was my light bulb moment. That was my intermediate to advanced light bulb moment or actually it might have even been my advanced to expert light bulb moment at UCLA. I was playing against a player in Alpha 2, and he was using Bison, and I was Birdie, and all he kept doing was just jumping back. Actually, you know what? I'm going to talk about this in a little bit later, Dead Frog, so we'll get into that in a little bit. I'll tell the story in a little bit. So let's keep going. So your question, Actualized, was why does it always sometimes feel like that the opponent is playing at an accelerated speed, and they'll do specific movements, and everything always favors them, right? This is what I talked about. This is what I'm talking about, training your opponent. Once you get so good and you start realizing all those moments, you start recognizing the patterns, and you can recognize when your opponent learns, this is when you can start training your opponent. You're basically telling the opponent what to do. They think that they're in control of themselves. Let me go back a little bit. They think that they are playing a game, but what you're actually doing is everything that your opponent wanted you to do at that particular moment. And because you're doing everything that your opponent is expecting you to do, they are always already ready to counter it. And so it feels like they're faster than you. It feels like they're always in a situation that's favorable to them. Of course they're always in a situation favorable to them, because little did you know, you're not only doing everything that they know, they're making you do that thing. You know, there's all these like little psychological studies before where like some guy will do stuff, tell a story or whatever like that, and then they'll ask the guy a question and then they can predict their answer, and like on the like those magic tricks where like, oh, you know, why don't you do this? And then they show you this envelope being like, you were thinking of the number 3, and the guy's like, oh my god, it's because of the story they told and the things they say like affects your brain or whatever like that. That's kind of like what happens in fighting games a lot of the times. You know, you can tell the opponent a story so well that they start falling into your rhythm. For example, you can start throwing fireballs at your opponent, and once you start getting really good, they're not jumping over them because you know they're smart enough not to get that they're worried about getting uppercut, but you're just throwing a ton of fireballs at them. And then, okay, well, this kind of goes into, you try to notice movement patterns. You can tell they're starting to get frustrated. They got hit by one fireball. They walked up and blocked another one. They got hit by another fireball. Now you're starting to recognize a little bit of frustration in them. So even though you just chucked like 7 fireballs in a row, the moment that they decide, all right, I'm jumping over the fireball, you can feel that moment. And then all of a sudden, you just start faking. And so the way that you get your opponent to jump, it's not even just the fake fireball. You walk into their optimal jump distance. You literally walk into the best possible position for them to jump at you, for them to maximize their combo. You don't throw fireball, you don't fake a fireball from the distance where they can just jump kick you in the face because Ryu's hands are stretched out. You literally walk into the range where they can get that full beefy combo. And so you walk there and you're just basically, you've already read that your opponent is frustrated by fireballs. You walk into that distance and you're like, you're going to jump at me. And the guy just jumps at you because you've given him everything he needs to jump at you. So your opponent is basically making you do what you want. You think you're in control of yourself, but honestly you're not. And you recognize these things by recognizing movement patterns and also when you can tell that they've learned. So, Dead Frog, he mentioned the story that I've told a long time ago about an opponent I played that was using Bison in Alpha 2, and I was using Birdie. And basically, like I said, this was my light bulb moment. This was my aha moment. Because I used to just play with that concept, like, this is the counter in this situation. This is a good sequence. This is a good pattern. I know A counters B. I knew the science of everything, but I didn't understand the mind games of everything properly. And so what he was doing with Bison in Alpha 2 is he would just go to the corner, head stomp, come down Devil's Reverse. So he would just Devil's Reverse, Devil's Reverse, Devil's Reverse in the corner all day. And the Devil's Reverse had enough priority, and Birdie's moves were also slow that I couldn't beat it. I would just walk up, and every time he Devil's Reverse, he'd come down and hit me. And then when he landed and I was scared to touch a button, he would jump up and Devil's Reverse, jump up and Devil's Reverse all day over and over again. And I couldn't figure out how to stop him. So I lost like 3 games against him or something like that. And, hang on a second. So I lost like 3 games against him. And then, or it was more than that. I was losing a ton of games against him. But what happened was I was like, okay. You know what? Birdie has the super where he jumps and like throws when he lands. So basically, like if you throw a fireball across the screen, he'll jump across the screen and grab you and throw you. So what I was told myself what I was going to do is the next time he did Devil's Reverse in the corner and came down, I would wait till he almost lands, activate my super, use its invincibility to go through the Devil's Reverse and grab him on the ground. So I had this all ready to go. So I chased him into the corner, got ready for him to do the Devil's Reverse so that I could super grab him, and he never Devil's Reversed. He did not do a Devil's Reverse. In fact, he started poking me. He started scissor kicking me all of a sudden, doing all this other stuff. And I got mad. I was like, oh, okay, whatever. I chased him into the corner, and then I was like, okay. And he did not Devil's Reverse. And he just started attacking me and poking me and chipping me. And he never Devil's Reversed. I had my plan all ready to go to stop it, and he just did not do a Devil's Reverse again. I remember after losing all these matches, I was walking back home to my apartment from the arcade, and I was so angry. The entire time I was walking home, I was like, God damn it, I came up with this counter. I just wanted to land it once just to beat him when he did that because, and then somehow while I was walking, yeah, the walk of shame, absolutely. People who play in the arcade know all about that walk of shame, man. Seriously, shout out to Gentle Snow talking about that. And then the funny thing was, halfway through I was walking home, it hit me. It struck me. Everything, like my whole world of Street Fighter made sense. And the thought that came into my mind was, he knew exactly when I figured it out. He knew exactly that specific moment when I thought of a counter to it. And I was like, how did he do that? He was making me play this game. He was making me play that game. And as soon as he figured out that I figured it out, he changed his game and beat me that way. And I realized the big key was that the movement of my character changed. I stopped touching buttons. I stopped trying to poke. I stopped trying to hit, and you could probably see my character pumping to do super motions, getting ready for stuff like that. My behavior of my character drastically changed. I went from this guy trying to poke and get in and jump to just walking very patiently, get him in the corner. I can't wait to land my trick. And he knew it. And that was one of those moments that really just kind of taught me what Street Fighter was about. That it really was not about tricks beating tricks, that this counters this, that this counters this. It was more about your opponent making you do things, and your opponent actually reading you and understanding when you learn things. And as soon as that moment happened, that's when I improved drastically as a Street Fighter player. So it changed. It drastically changed there. And from that point forward, I did much better in fighting games. So, but yeah, that's a great story. So again, you notice sudden changes in behavior and such like that. And so what opponents will sometimes do as well, I've talked about this story in the past as well. Sometimes if you want to train your opponent, you also purposely give them what they want. In vanilla, I played against an Akuma player, and what I basically did was, I noticed every time he jumped back and threw an air fireball, when I jumped over the air fireball, he would stand roundhouse me, and I would have to block both hits. It was 0 in that game on block. So, he could dash away or whatever like that. So I jumped over the air fireball, he would land and stand roundhouse. And so what I basically did was I trained my opponent. I trained him by purposely jumping over the fireball over and over and over and over again and letting him stand roundhouse me. He was never in that big of a lead, so I felt like I had to do anything about it. So I came up with a counter in my mind, but I wasn't going to use it. I was just going to leave it there. I was going to let it hang on the table, and then I would jump over the fireball a lot and block the stand roundhouse a lot to get him accustomed to doing that, to get him to feel safe. I forced a pattern into him because it felt like a good idea. Then in the very last round, when it was like, okay, I just want to beat him now, I did an empty jump land, EX green hand, beat it, got in, and then just did Zangief shenanigans and beat him after that. So I trained him, I purposely gave him what he wanted to the point where it became his pattern. I forced a pattern onto him, and then I was able to beat him. So that's actually one of the ways to do that. So let's go back here. Feints are a really good way to train your opponent. Just hitting jabs a lot of the times, walking around hitting buttons that are safe, because it just keeps you unpredictable. It makes it hard for your opponent to figure out what you're doing. And then there's certain players like Marn, like Avai will get into this sometimes. If they get a good read on you, a lot of the times, I talk about figuring out when your opponent has learned, figuring out when your opponent has understood that they are being countered in a situation. There's also another method in which you just rush them down so badly that they just never get a chance to think, and they never get a chance to learn, and then you can just own them up, and you can get the idea that they're getting frustrated, and then you could beat them a lot. You can beat them a lot easier because you just make them so frustrated. So last thing I want to talk about is just offline versus online. Obviously the big difference, the number one difference is body language, body language, body language. If you are a purely online player and you are playing offline, actually hang on, before I go into that, let me read this one more time. Let's see. So first off, I want to answer SF4 Life's question. He said he just came in. Not sure if I addressed this. Does reading an opponent involve a methodical process or is it a factor of experience? It's a lot of it is experience, and then a lot of times, actually almost most of it is experience, because you start recognizing when people learn things and stuff. But I want to get to this question that Actualize is asking here again. And again, shout outs to Actualize, because he's asking a lot of great questions. And I love this, right? This is the kind of thing that I want to have. So he basically said he's played in sets where he's trained his opponent, but where I've been baited to do all things as well. But sometimes after long sets, I tend to go into autopilot, or sometimes. Sometimes I'll start off on autopilot. Yeah, autopilot is the most dangerous thing ever, because I do that too. There are periods of times where, I've talked about I'm a volume player, but there have been times where I'll play Street Fighter 4 a very long time, and then eventually I just reach this autopilot mode, and then I stop playing, and then I come back to the game, and then all of a sudden I play way better because I've lost my autopilot. I've kind of broken out of some of my muscle memory, and I've started to play a little bit smarter. Here's actually a really good advice if you go into autopilot, and Vi talks about this all the time too. Go play a different fighting game. Seriously, go play a different fighting game. When you play a different fighting game, there's so many different skills, there's so many different strategies. This is why, as a fighting game player, I personally believe it's always good to have your main game and at least a secondary game that you dabble in. If you find yourself in autopilot, go play the other game. And then it loosens you up, it breaks your mind back out into pieces. Like you've solidified into this pattern here. You go play the other fighting game, it's like, wait, I don't have invincible backdashes anymore. I don't have uppercuts anymore. Oh, wait, it's different a little bit. And then that solidification kind of breaks apart a little bit. And then when you go back to the first game, you can think clearly a little bit and stuff like that. So, and yeah, there is the absolute opposite problem there, Carcius, is that you play too many fighting games. And in that case, you're on autopilot on none of them. And you don't have the knowledge on any of them, and it's really rough. I mean, it's hard. I have this problem right now too because there's so many fun fighting games out there, and I want to play all of them. I was saying, like, I want KOF to have good netcode on Steam. There's a subconscious part of my mind that's like, well, you know what? If the netcode's bad, I don't have to play. Because then I don't have to learn another fighting game and stuff. So it does get hard. So. It is really hard, so. Shoutouts to Agent 007 there. James Chen loves his pun. David does not respect lore. They are UltraChen. Yes. How do pros switch between mindsets of different games? They'll play drastically different. Well, that's Woofles asking that, and that is just the situation where they know that they can get away with two different styles, and they'll just switch a different style. And it just keeps the opponents on the toes and stuff like that. So it's very good. It's very good. So offline, body language is an important thing. You give away so much that you do not even realize. There are times, like, one of the best ones is you're sitting there, someone does a trick to you, and then you nod. I do this all the time. I nod all the time. You just told your opponent you learned his trick. You just gave every signal to them humanly possible that now you can be countered by the next level of mind games. Frustration. That's another one. Huge amount of body language, right? One of my friends pointed out to me that whenever I tried to fake an uppercut, I always go really violently gesture with my fake uppercut motion. But if I want to actually uppercut, I stay perfectly stiff. I'm going to be tricky. He's not going to expect an uppercut because I'm not moving. But I want him to think I'm an uppercut, so I'm going to be really emphatic. And, in fact, I'm giving him the signal just in the opposite way. There's so many little things about body language. And there's sometimes you'll see even a person twitch just a little in their chair, and you know that they figured something out. They know they learned something. Me and David talk about this all the time. In between matches, watch streams with Ricky Ortiz. In between matches, he's always looking at his opponent. You can see him. He's facing forward, but his eyes are rolled to the side. He's looking at his opponent. He's reading their expression. If you see them laughing and going, ah, ha, 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 then that's a totally different read than when you see them just focused, or you see them looking frustrated. If you see him looking frustrated, the next round, let's say Ricky Ortiz plays the super turtle game, just completely just outpatients you. And then he looks over his opponent, and the opponent just looks so frustrated and angry. Next round, next game, he knows just to rush them the hell down because they're frustrated. They're only thinking about, how do I break the defense? How do I break the defense? And if your body language didn't give that away, it wouldn't be so obvious to him to make that kind of a transition. So you really have to be careful once you transition from online to offline. It sounds like a dumb thing, but you really have to start understanding that body language is part of the game. Someone asked me a question one time. I think it was at Wednesday Night Fights or Run Back. They were just like, oh no, it was Romance who was asking this question, and I think he was just basically like, do people not like the fact that when you sit next to each other, you can see each other's like hand motions and buttons or whatever like that, you know? And it's just like, you know what? It's just, that's just the way we've grown up, and it's a subtle skill that a lot of arcade players have learned that a lot of online players do not know about. So there is a lot of giveaway. There is a lot of stuff. And yes, you can absolutely use false body language, Strider Zero. Alex Vai's favorite trick, the cross-up hurricane with Ryu, right? He jumps up and he does spin kick with kick, and it crosses you up and it hits you. So the next time he jumps and does spin kick with fierce, you don't know it, but your brain sees this off the side of your head. And so you see him do that quarter circle back motion, and you're like, okay, you reacted to that, not to what Ryu's doing. You reacted to that body language, so you switch your block. But since he did spin kick with fierce, he's not doing a hurricane kick. He's just doing jump fierce because Ryu has no spin kick, no quarter circle back plus fierce. So you hold forward on the controller, he lands on your face with a jump fierce, and he gets a free combo. Is farting a good tactic? You know what? Seriously, the only reason why I'm responding to that, Shizzy, is, you know what? Tune in to Not Safe for Work Fridays on the IE Battlegrounds runs from Super Dojo. I want you to ask Mike Watson that question. Because he would be the perfect person to answer that question. Okay, so yeah, so body languages, look for motions of surprise and stuff, look between rounds and fights and such. Oops, that's it. So, there's obviously a lot more to reading your opponents. It gets very subtle, it gets very detailed and such. But, what I'm hoping is that this is kind of like a good way to help, almost like a primer into understanding exactly how that all works. And, ooh, I'm floating in space. Hang on a second. There we go. There we go. Okay. So, yeah, there's a lot more to it, and again, it was like I said earlier, it does take a lot of experience. It's a lot of it is experience, and it's just figuring out what's going on and such like that. So don't be discouraged. Understand that everybody goes through the same growth pattern in fighting games. You'll reach that point, and maybe if you realize that you're in that intermediate level and you're just doing the rule of two and you're falling into patterns and stuff like that, you can learn to change your patterns. And I remember there was one time I was playing Vi in Super Turbo. I was playing Cammy against his Ryu. And there was a period of time where he was just blowing me up. He was destroying me because I kept trying to get past his fireball game and I couldn't do it. Then one time I played him, this was at Super Arcade in a Super Turbo tournament, I literally just told myself, you know what, I'm just going to jump at random times. I'm not going to think about it. I'm not going to try to predict the fireball. I'm just going to jump. Because he's going to uppercut me out of there. I'm going to lose a big chunk of damage or whatever like that. Whatever. But it doesn't matter because I'm obviously playing too logical. I'm playing too much into his game. So I'm just going to jump whenever. I don't even care. And I played those games and I almost beat Vi's Ryu. That was the first time I've come that close to beating him in a tournament like that. And it was because I started playing a lot more random. So, it's those kind of things that you just start to figure out. You got to learn this logic, and then you got to unlearn it. And that's what's tricky. That's why I say when you get to that advanced area, sometimes it might dip a little because you start losing to beginners, and then the expert players take advantage of you more. It's tough. It's tough. I'm not even going to lie, but it can be done. A lot of people have done it. And it is one of the hardest things to learn about fighting games. But I'm just going to tell you this right now. Like, as painful and as struggling as it might be, and at that point where it just feels like it's just so annoying to do to keep playing this game because you don't feel like you're winning anymore. The moment that you get past that hump and something clicks in your head, and it's usually weirdly instant like that. When something clicks in your head, it's one of the greatest feelings ever. It's really wonderful. I know someone joked earlier about it that was like, how do you know, James? I mean, I got there at one point, and it was really cool, and it was a fantastic feeling. Every time I've broken through one of those walls, it was an absolute fantastic feeling, and obviously I've regressed since then, but you know what, I've been there, and it's absolutely rewarding. It's one of the greatest feelings ever. So, it is discouraging, but I totally recommend just keep trudging through it and keep getting there. And if you guys have any other further questions on this topic, obviously I don't want to keep going because I'm running into David's time here. If you have any further questions on the topic, send me emails, UltraChenTV@gmail.com with the subject line Ask jchensor. Ask me more about mindset stuff and questions about the stuff that I've talked about here. And maybe I'll take some of the best questions, answer them, and put them in a blog post or something on our website, which is UltraChenTV.com. So that's about it for today. I'm going to go ahead and sign out for now, and then we'll be back with some Level 3 Focus with David. And he's going to be going over some PR ROG versus infiltration matches, which should be super fascinating. And we'll probably take a short little break, and take care of stuff. So we'll be up there probably at about 10 p.m. So stick around for that, guys. All right. Thanks, everybody.